Hey everybody, Nick from the Bass Hookup, and I'm out here to do this report basically, and I want to do it quick because it's 100 and whatever it is out here, 112 or whatever, on Tuesday, about 12:30 in the afternoon, and I've gone on a couple trips lately, two last week. So last week I went Sunday, and then I went again on Saturday and fished a little tournament with my dad, whose birthday it was that day. So we went out, fished a little tournament to celebrate his birthday, and there were two different stories, right? On Sunday, of course, went out with my buddy Gary. We caught him pretty good, as you guys could see in this footage. And then on Saturday with my dad, we struggled. Big time struggle bus. Caught a lot of fish, a lot of small fish, anywhere from, 4 inches to 14, 15 inches at the biggest. Maybe our biggest was a 3-pounder. But yeah, totally different. So Sunday was high tide, Saturday low tide, no current. So that's what I want to talk about today, is if you're going out there to the Delta, how to kind of pattern these fish and where they seem, as far as what I've seen, where it seems to me they are right now, and where they're staging in areas that you want to look in to maximize your potential out there on the Delta this week, or as long as it stays hot, okay, even through the fall. So right now these fish seem to be in current. It's hot, current cools them off, current, shade, weeds. Okay, we're going to talk about all those things. So number one, you got to have current. Got to have current, whether it be incoming or outgoing. Now outgoing seems to be the better tide for me, high outgoing. When there's no current at all, it's really tough. So you want to run towards that current, and that's one mistake we probably made on Sunday, was fishing a spot that I had caught them, or I'm sorry, on Saturday with my dad. We went to a spot, I caught them on Sunday, and it wasn't the same tide, and there wasn't any current, so those fish weren't there. If we would have been there on the same tide, they probably would have been there. But as you guys can see from this footage, I'm punching these mats, and the mats are in current. Okay, on Sunday it was high outgoing tide, the current was running through there pretty swiftly. The fish are under those mats in the shade. They're just waiting for something to fall on their head, waiting for bait fish to get pushed up under those mats, and they're sitting there in the cooler water, waiting for something to eat. Okay, and if you throw something in there on them, you're gonna catch them, just like Gary and I did on that high outgoing tide. Now the mats to look for, I don't really like punching plain hydrilla, plain hyacinth. When I say plain, I mean just that one type of weed by itself. I look for a mixture. So as you could see here, these mats look perfect to me, and where I've been catching fish, it's going to be hydrilla with a little bit of that frog cheese or duckweed on top, maybe even some hyacinth on top. Or if it's hyacinth or periwinkle floating on top, on the edges there's going to be mats of hydrilla growing from the bottom, or even just floating up against that. So the mixture of different weeds, again, this mat that you guys are seeing is like a perfect mat I would look for in the Delta right now. And as far as size of the mat, I don't like to find huge spanses of weeds. It's really hard to pick them out, pick them apart. You want to find little, small patches of weeds that contain fish, and those ones reload, and you'll find that out after you fish them time and time again, if they reload and what tides they're on. But the smaller the mat, it's easy to pinpoint. If I find a mat like the one that Gary and I punched these fish out of, they're either there or they're not. But if they're there, those usually reload, and they're small enough to where in a tournament or something you could run right up there and make a couple flips. They're either there or they're not. If you have a huge 100-yard, 200-yard span of weeds that come 20 yards off the rock or off an island, very hard to fish. You're gonna have to sit there and pick it apart, and there may not be anything there, so you could be wasting your time. Now that's where I would start off. Current is the key right now. Current and weeds. Okay, if there aren't weeds, just at least current and some sort of structure, whether it be wood, rock, something providing shade for these fish. All right, when I went back out with my dad, we had extreme low tide, no current movement, hardly any, and we started out on an offshore spot because there was no current. There's the thing I wanted to punch was not, basically it wasn't in the water yet. So we went to an offshore spot that I knew had deeper water on it, had some cover, weeds, things around it, little hard bottom spot. And you can watch this, we caught a ton of fish here. Now what we're catching our fish on here is just a Texas rig Senko with a tiny 1/16 ounce tungsten bullet weight on it. And we're just throwing it out there and just dragging it over those hard spots out there. So these spots I've just found, you know, throughout my history of fishing the Delta. So, you know, to find these spots, you have to go out there, I would suggest in the fall when the water is really, really clear, and look offshore. You know, inside flooded islands, look offshore, look for lanes in the weeds, hard bottom spots that probably won't grow weeds throughout the year after year. You could go back and there's like a little hole in the weeds, or maybe a good sized hole in the weeds, where those fish, they will sit there. Mark that thing on your GPS, remember where it's at, and that's what we're fishing here. So after we do that, we run, I wait about half the day, we run into the track. I fish a frog on some islands that I've caught fish on, and we do start catching some fish that way. But they're not the size that we want. Maybe we should have stayed here. We would have had more tide. I think we probably should have just stayed there. But of course, we had to go back to where Gary and I caught them on Sunday because we caught so many good fish. We had to go back. So we get there, and there is zero current moving. No current. It's low slack. Well, after an hour, the current starts coming in. We go hit that spot, but there's no water on it, none. Still managed to catch a couple fish, but it's about a foot deep. Compared to when Gary and I were there, it was like 3 to 4 feet deep. So big, big difference. So what you guys could learn from what I've done, and the mistake I made Saturday, was stay in the current. Stay in the current. You need a punch rod, you need a frog, and maybe something to throw, you know, something to flip, like a jig, a Senko, even a drop shot. I know you catch a lot of fish, but you could hit certain structure spots where there's good fish, okay? So you're primarily gonna be punching right now. Punching is a big key. And if you wanna see some tips to punching, you guys could go back. We've done a video a couple weeks ago, maybe a week ago, on punching tips. Go back and look at that. If you're new to it, if you're familiar with punching, just get out there, bring that punch stick. I mean, you guys all know it's summertime. Of course, you need a punch rod, frog rod. But break it down, okay? Don't spend, at least I wouldn't spend a ton of time fishing huge mats like I'm saying. A lot of the mats that I'm catching fish in are offshore as well. So, you know, if it's low tide, a lot of guys struggle on low tide because everything that they fish along the bank is out of water. Start looking offshore. There are weeds that grow out there offshore. You know, it might seem like they're in the middle of nowhere and there aren't going to be any bass there, but I assure you there are bass, and some of the biggest bass offshore. They pull out, or they just live in those mats out in the middle of the slough all the time. That's my biggest tip. Look for those weeds offshore. Mats may be twice the size of your boat. The size of your boat are perfect size to fish out there. And even when it becomes high tide and those mats out offshore or just underwater, they're great to have in your memory bank to go back and say it's morning or night and throw a buzzbait over the top, a plopper, a frog, some sort of topwater wake bait over the top of those things, because those big bass will live out there and they're just waiting for bait out there. And why they live out there is because there's more current out there compared to on a bank that might have curves to it and some back eddies and stuff. The current out in the middle of these sloughs is always flowing the hardest. So those are going to be your best spots. If you can find weeds that are near the little mouths or cut throughs in flooded islands and that water's pouring in and out and there's good mats next to that, always really, really good spots to punch as well. So hopefully you guys learn a little bit here off of my 2 trips that I made to the Delta. I know this is kind of a short video, but it's super, super hot. So I said I was going to keep it short because I'm burning up my feet. My foot, I think, is already sunburned from standing here for like 5 minutes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.